This year's gaming showcase has had a trust problem, and I don't just mean, do you even trust Xbox? That's an entirely different story. Today's trust problem is that people often did not believe what they were seeing, and you may have felt this yourself. You look at a new game, you start to doubt what was on screen was fully human-made. And then, you see the store pages go up, and on those store pages, you see the confirmation. Generative AI tools were used in the development of the game. Now, at least in the West, this tends to create quite the backlash. So you may be thinking, why would these companies risk a backlash this obvious? Here's the thing. Some of the devs have absolutely no idea how you feel. Over the last few weeks, it kept happening. Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis put a disclosure on its Steam page saying that it used Gen AI for, quote, early exploration and temporary development content. That's all for a remake of a 1996 game. A bunch of fans weren't thrilled, but what was on Steam is kind of just Amazon's line in this whole thing. Then there's 1666 Amsterdam. It got called out for Gen AI marketing assets in its demo. The devs looked into it and then apologized for not pulling all the placeholder stuff. Then there's Stellar Blade Blood Rain. It came under fire for, quote, very visibly AI slop, Chinese characters and textures, a bunch of weird things, and then Shift Up CEO posted some generated key art for the game, which is fairly in line with his own fairly pro-AI stance. And what's perhaps baffled some people is that not one of them seemed to think that the likes of this would really be a problem. But then came another game, Kingdom Hearts. The Switch 2 collection reveal had walls melting into each other and a Donald Duck with different numbers of fingers on each hand. Now, a decade ago, that would have dragged Walt Disney out of his cryogenic pod to throttle you, but now it's what we're getting in a professional product. But what really set people off about that was that it was a legendary franchise, finally back at last and walking straight into the same trap that many people see so many games walking into. And that is where we're going to get to our biggest example and a bit of where the wind is blowing. Crazy Taxi. Yeah, Crazy Taxi's involved. So, the first new mainline Crazy Taxi game since 2002 should have been cause for pure celebration. For many, that celebration is not so pure because people saw the AI disclosure on the game's Steam page, leading to immediate backlash. Now, the generic statement they put out really didn't help. It said that Gen AI tools were used, but that it wasn't used for anything to do with the actual, performers, right? So, actors and stuff in the game. But since Sega were doing lots of press for Crazy Taxi at public events, the press were there and they got a chance to do some follow-up. And here is what Game Informer's Brian Shea managed to squeeze out of Sega. Assets generated were still subject to review by the development team. Hardly a stunning statement, but in the worst case, it would mean a blatant pipeline from Gen AI tools straight to your screen, with of course, developers in the middle. Now, where it gets more interesting is Kenji Kano. That's because he's responded to all of this, it would seem. He sat down with Kotaku, and Kotaku asked him about it. And here's the quote from him. "We used it as reference," Kano explained via translator. So our artists would pull up and generate some of their ideas, and then they would look at that, generated image, and they would then draw the actual thing. So actual creators, everything from programming to assets, everything is made by an actual human. It's only used as a reference for them to look at, and then they would actually create the actual thing that would go into the game. And that basically means that we're kind of back to where we were in the discussion with Larian at the start of the year, where what's being investigated is generative art at the concepting stage, and we know that that has been the case for Crazy Taxi World Tour. Drawing from reference is a totally normal thing, so you could make the argument that this still does preserve the role of the human, and that overall it's basically fine. And that means that for some people, this will be a compromise that they can live with as long as, of course, a human has, by and large, made the actual thing. But for many other people, it is the fruit of a poisoned earth. And that's because you can't fully separate what they've made, say the references that they've generated, from the, in many cases, plagiarized work that all that came from. Now that's an important issue, but it's not the main thrust of this video, so I'm going to set it aside for now. And what I'm going to move to is, I think what might be in your head as being obvious. Surely Sega knew that this would be controversial. If humans are going to make all the assets, then why use this stuff anyway versus normal references? And also, maybe most of all, why act surprised when the backlash hit. And that's where it's time for us to talk about a bit of a sobering reality. For this one, we've got to go back to a few weeks before the game showcases. Recreate Games, the people who made the multiplayer brawler Party Animals, announced an AI video competition. It was pretty simple. You make AI videos and you can win part of a $75,000 cash prize. What happened next was outrage in social media and over 2,000 negative reviews on Steam. To the people commenting, to those reviewers, this was a baffling situation. It was a case of a very successful studio walking straight into controversy, right? Using tech that many people do say is based on plagiarism of other people's work. Which does make some of the contest's rules a little bit funny because, well, if you plagiarize, you will be barred from the contest. In response to all of this, they followed up with an apology and an explanation. Here's the explanation, and this is where things start to get a bit more important, and we're really building towards something here. Quote, "We are not trying to dismiss handmade work or disrespect creators. To us, AI is just another tool. What we truly care about is the idea, the expression, and the final work." Rather predictably, they ended up cancelling the entire thing, and when they did, it kind of hit the same note where they just hadn't thought about how players would really feel about all of this stuff. Even if, from their perspective, it was more about using the AI tools to effectively lower the barrier to entry for the competition. So it's an interesting enough little story, but surely it's just that. Surely it's just a little story, and this is some random tangent in a video that I should have cut. Oh no, this is really getting towards the main thrust of the video and something you guys are absolutely going to feel. You see, there's a real gap between their reasoning and how the audience actually felt, and it all points to something far bigger and far more important. Recreate Games are based in China. And as Nico partners' director, Daniel Ahmad, who's someone we've went to as a go-to source for essentially China analysis when it comes to games, as he suggests, Asian companies are in particular struggling with how their overseas markets are reacting to generative AI. So here's what Daniel said. "It's going to be something watching Asia-based devs grapple with the fact that while Gen AI is more accepted in their domestic markets, they're going to see massive backlash in Western markets." He's absolutely right. It will be something to watch all of this unfold. You see, in places like South Korea, riding on tax revenue from many chip sales, or of course China, where this is already everywhere, companies are quite happily using all of this tech in that region of the world. To them, it is just efficiency. But it does go beyond the companies, and it actually goes to the people. You see, surveys suggest that once you break down sentiment by region, how people feel about all the AI stuff varies wildly. So in the US and UK, people are mixed on AI at best, and on the creative side, they usually lean a lot more in the negative. And of course, there's the obvious consumer side. Plenty of us look at the data centers behind all of this, and, well, we do see a big fancy building full of cool technology, but it's also the reason why you probably can't afford a new graphics card. But when we move to China, it's a bit different. You see, there, one survey found that 83% of the people asked were actually optimistic about AI. And a part of that is because they're not paying for it the way that you and I are. And that's what Daniel Ahmad's talking about when he says, it'll be something to see all of this stuff go down over the coming months and years. And it's certainly a problem we can see playing out across all of the showcase reveals. It's not really a story as simple as just East versus West. This is the type of thing that's happening everywhere. And from the big examples so far, we've got French, Japanese, Korean, and American studios all using this tech in fairly similar ways. Looking through the studios and publishers, some are happy for the end consumer to actually see the AI stuff, others are very much not. And that's why companies are tailoring how they use it and how they market it to everyone that they're trying to sell to. So in a way, it's a big PR crisis, but as I'm sure you know, well, one should never let a crisis go to waste. Whether or not your game uses Gen AI is now a marketing tool. And this gets interesting where the Ico and Shadow of the Colossus director, Fumio Ueda, told PC Gamer that he uses it for scheduling and admin, but that is about it. Everything that is considered game development is made by humans. And I think that's fairly similar to, say, my own position. I do a bunch of automation and scheduling stuff, but it's nothing that actually touches the stuff that we make. But for an example of this from a completely different scale and region, well, Paramount Games' new head of creative and production went out of their way to tell the game business that they won't be using it. To him, an AI-made Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game would be missing something. I think his quote absolutely nails it. Did the computer grow up collecting Ninja Turtles action figures and comic books and dreaming of skateboarding in the sewers? No. I absolutely agree. A massive part of art is human experience, and if the AI ends up meaning that our art is coming from a place of less human experience, that's obviously a bad thing for the creative integrity of that art. Now, all that being said, we have seen this work in the other direction. Suda51 and Suri65's Hotel Barcelona climbed to positive Steam reviews after they stripped the Gen AI out. Of course, all of this kind of counts as marketing, but it's also marketing aimed at a mostly English-speaking audience. And that's good if you're that English-speaking audience. But it's not as simple as that for every game. Take Shift Up as an example. They're self-publishing Stellar Blade Blood Rain so they can get it out on PC faster. If you take a look at, say, the Stellar Blade Steam reviews, you see that more than 30% of their audience is Chinese, so being in PC is really good. They want to hit that audience. Now, broadly, that audience will not care about the AI disclosure, as long as, of course, the game looks good, translates properly, and runs well. That's all fine for the Chinese audience, but the Western one could be a little different. But to bring it back to Sega, well, as it turns out, they knew that all of this was coming, at least in part. And we know that because back in their March investor Q&A, they flagged generative AI as a concern themselves. Here's what they said. As AI adoption can face strong resistance in creative areas such as character creation, we will proceed by carefully assessing appropriate use cases such as streamlining development processes. To them, the problem was mainly about the likes of, say, faces, voices, the actual art in the game, that kind of thing. But what they weren't really ready for was how visceral the reaction would be to just about any use of it at all, it would seem, especially for many English-speaking players. And as of right now, it looks like neither side is backing down. What we're currently hurtling towards is a divide. Some of these developers talk like the AI side of things is inevitable, like this is the future and there really will be no other way around it, that they better just use the tools and get the efficiency gains. Players in different parts of the world feel very differently about that. Some take it as a settled issue, others aren't having it, and as companies and players from everywhere keep colliding on places like Steam, this is only going to get worse, or at the very least, more noisy. It is mostly the English-speaking players taking devs and publishers to task on Gen AI use. And often, it's for things that half of these companies still don't think they got wrong. There'll always be games that skip this tech entirely, and plenty of you will back them for that. But to a studio halfway across the world, like many of the studios we've talked about today, if they were to not use AI, to them, and perhaps as the population of their countries would see it, it would really just be a thing that makes them a bit different, and at best, just another marketing beat to use. And if it's not worth the marketing beat, well, then I have to imagine they'll dive into those tools. They'll do what they can, and that's because ultimately gaming has grown global. It's not just the big traditionally wealthy countries, even if those countries do end up driving a lot of the revenue. Where will this land? I can't tell you. I cannot see the future. What I will say, though, is that this is far from a settled issue, because it's only really now that we're getting a bunch of this stuff properly integrated into game engines. Things like, say, the MCP that's been added to Unreal Engine 5.8. This will develop, and to be honest with you, I think the vast majority of devs will end up using that stuff, at least on the code front. On the art front, I think way more devs will choose not to than to use it, but that may shift over time as younger generations who are more native to this tech just see it as a normal thing that exists in their world. All of this is messy, all of it's complicated, and the best thing that we can do is just have the discussion, because I think that's how we're going to make progress. And for something else that's made progress, check out this video next about the Steam lawsuits and potentially all of our games being more expensive. It's pretty crazy, and it's even got Gabe Newell actually testifying.